This conference will now be recorded.
Again, hello everyone, and welcome to the North Carolina Balance of States Anti-Discrimination Policy webinar for 2021. It is April 28th. My name is Kevin McNamee. I'm a project specialist with the North Carolina Balance of States COC with NCCEH, and I'll be leading us through our agenda today. For our agenda, today we are going to be doing an overview of the anti-discrimination policy for the North Carolina Balance of States COC. We're going to start with a brief overview of the policy itself and then go through it section by section. So today's agenda kind of does mirror the layout of the anti-discrimination policies and procedures, which have been updated and are on our website. So to begin with a bit of an overview of the policy, why do we have an anti-discrimination policy? We know that discrimination is often the underlying cause behind a lack of inclusion. It means treating a person or group unfairly because of a particular characteristic, such as gender, disability, age, ethnic origin, skin color, nationality, sexuality, gender identity, and/or religious beliefs. This usually results in negative consequences for the person or group, reducing their opportunities, excluding them from communities, and restricting their ability to contribute to society and live their preferred and authentic life. Discrimination has been described as putting prejudice into practice. So the North Carolina Balance of States COC's anti-discrimination policy seeks to combat inherent discrimination by putting into practice the act of inclusion and helping providers in the COC to preserve the dignity of everyone that we work with. So why do we do this? Like, what are the benefits of having this kind of a policy? We know that there is great diversity within the homeless population. There are all types of people who experience homelessness. So the North Carolina Balance of States COC policy helps ensure we reach everyone and that everyone is then treated fairly. We know that some communities are overrepresented in homelessness. For example, 40% of all youth experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ, but make up only 7% of the entire population across the United States. Similarly, the Balance of States Racial Equity Assessment shows that there's a greater percentage of Black people who are experiencing homelessness than the percentage of Black people in the COC. The same applies to Native American or Alaska Native North Carolinians as well. And so although homelessness is stigmatizing for all people who experience it, many individuals are doubly or triply marginalized due to racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. In fact, discrimination is an identifiable cause of homelessness. For if people experience active discrimination that impacts their ability to obtain adequate housing, work, or education, this can contribute to their experience of poverty and puts them at greater risk of becoming homeless. Unfortunately, many people continue to experience its negative impact once on the streets from strangers, other homeless persons, and unfortunately from many service providers. So it's just worth reiterating and noting that if homeless services, if the services that we offer are meant and designed to be a last refuge where people seek us out when they have nowhere else to go, then it is incumbent upon us to ensure that we do not further contribute to discrimination and marginalization. Further, it's worth noting that having and implementing an anti-discrimination policy is a requirement from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So in the fiscal year 2017 COC competition, Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA, HUD required that all COCs have an anti-discrimination policy in place once awarded projects were contracted. So at the time, then NCCEH drafted a policy in fall of 2017, researching the policies of other COCs across the country, and also crafting a policy that adhered to HUD regulations for the balance of state, but also took into account our COC's priorities. So while this is a HUD requirement, the policy really makes sense for our COC. We've long committed to ensuring that all individuals and families experiencing homelessness have equal access to housing and to the services across the entire 79 county region. So then in 2018, the policy was expanded to include procedures that operationalize these policy requirements. And the Balance of State Steering Committee approved the policy at its April 2020 meeting, setting an expectation now for how agencies in the COC will treat and interact with people presenting for services regardless of their race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, disability, age, gender, LGBTQIA status, or marital status. The steering committee then approved minor grammatical changes and clarifying language to this policy in April of 2021. So the policy is broken into several sections. We have an equal access protections and procedures. We have an involuntary family separation policy, a faith-based activities policy, and a grievances and retaliation policy. So all sections focus on the specific policy that the COC and its providers must follow to provide equal access to housing and services. However, it also provides procedures to assist different segments of the COC to understand some of the specific ways that the COC will govern and provide oversight of the policy, how agencies will design policies and provide oversight to their staff, and how program staff will interact with the people experiencing homelessness on a daily basis. So in a few minutes, we're going to go through each of these sections of the overall policies and talk way more in depth about what you need to know and how to apply this at the agency and program level. Which then leads us to who does this apply to? So this policy is mandatory for all COC grantees, for all ESG grantees, and for other grantees of other federal and state funding sources. It is also strongly recommended for all other providers within the North Carolina Balance of State COC region. So for agencies who are in the COC that are required to follow this policy, agency staff should update any agency and program policies to ensure that these protections in this policy exist, and or that the current policies and procedures that you have do not conflict with any of the policies and procedures in the final anti-discrimination policy for the COC. Beyond updating agency and program policies and procedures, people on this call representing your agency should ensure that your leadership of your agency and other staff within your agencies have access to this final policy. Agency and program leadership should plan on how to provide initial and ongoing training to the anti-discrimination policy. Agencies should also be prepared to intervene with program staff when they are not following the policies and determine how your agencies will evaluate your program's adherence to the procedures. So the COC's anti-discrimination policy lists specific procedures that help the COC's agencies within the Balance of State COC and staff and volunteers and contractors in those agencies understand how to provide equal protections to protected classes of people. So we know that then that everyone has a role to play. And I think what we're getting at here is that this is not a stagnant document, that we are really encouraging and asking that your agencies make this a real living and breathing part of the way that your agency operates, from every person who is responsible for carrying out the services that you provide. So as we go through, we'll kind of have a checklist at each kind of stage along the way here so that you have some takeaway questions to say, like, how is your agency doing, or where might you be able to make some adjustments? So for the broad overall policy, does your agency have an anti-discrimination policy? Is there a stated plan to train new staff and clearly communicate this policy during onboarding processes? Do you have annual trainings provided for staff and volunteers and contractors? And does the intake process include a copy of your agency's anti-discrimination policies to clients or people who are presenting it for services, so that you are really communicating that to the people that you serve as well? All right, so to jump into kind of the first section, then we will look at the equal access policies and procedures. So overall, the COC and agencies within the COC will ensure equal access to programs for all individuals and families. So what this means is that everyone has the same opportunity for services and housing. So programs can follow your eligibility and funding requirements, but must not make decisions to deny services to any of the protected classes listed if the person otherwise would be eligible for that program. So you cannot discriminate based on race, ethnicity, national origin, sex, disability, either physical, mental, or sensory, gender identity, domestic violence or sexual violence status, color, language, religion, familial status, age, LGBTQ+ status, or marital status. In practice, this means that only eligibility and funding requirements allow programs to turn people away from who are presenting from services. So for example, a shelter or housing programs who have single unaccompanied men as an eligibility requirement for their programs can deny services to a family unit or to women. However, under the equal access rule, if in that same shelter you have a transgender person presenting for services who is a trans man, meaning someone who has transitioned from female to male, the shelter cannot deny services to that individual. He would have the same opportunity as any other man presenting for services at that shelter. So let's talk about the COC in general. This means that the steering committee, its subordinate committees, its work groups, NCCEH staff who provide administrative and support and decision-making for the COC, for the full COC. So what we will do is maintain policies and procedures prohibiting discrimination. That is the policy that we're reviewing today. We will provide annual trainings to the agencies and staff. Welcome, this is what we're doing right now. And we will use and commit to using an appropriate inclusive language in all COC communications, policies, and materials. We will develop partnerships with organizations that can provide resources and expertise. We will support clients' understandings of privacy rights, and we will develop and maintain and publish grievance procedures, which is part of what we will look at today. So then, as mentioned, so what are we asking then of agencies within the balance of state COC? So as mentioned previously, COC and ESG funded agencies are required to follow the anti-discrimination policies and procedures. However, staff encourage all agencies in the COC to follow these procedures because they provide clients, especially those with the greatest needs, equal opportunity to receive the services that they need in a fair and humane way. These procedures direct how agencies should develop a culture that supports all people experiencing homelessness, no matter their background and specific issues, and give explicit direction on the type of support and oversight needed for staff providing the services to people presenting at their door for services. So agencies in the COC will administer adhere to the anti-discrimination policies and procedures and incorporate them into your policies. Ensure staff, volunteers, and contractors are trained on those policies at least annually. Again, we are recording this for you to share with your staff. Um, that you will use appropriate and inclusive language with all communication, including taking reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access to programs and activities by people with limited English proficiency, for whom English may not be their first language. We ask that you provide clear, transparent, and accessible information at intake, that you maintain confidentiality policies, ensuring client information such as legal name or sex assigned at birth are not shared, and we will talk more about that in a moment. That you mediate and resolve conflicts between clients, treating them fairly and equally, that you take immediate action to resolve inappropriate behavior, treatment, and harassment. And so worth noting with the limited English proficiency that that can include translated documents or access to interpretation services. And then, and so what does this then mean for staff, volunteers, and contractors at your agencies? So in this policy, the program staff really carry the daily responsibility of treating people presenting for services at your agencies fairly, and in a manner that ensures the safety for everyone involved. Agency policies and leadership staff should strongly support their program staff in making good decisions and having ongoing training and oversight to ensure that they can fulfill their obligations. And so staff, volunteers, and contractors then will provide equal access to facilities, services, financial aid, benefits to everyone, and treat them with dignity and respect, participate in annual training of the anti-discrimination policies and procedures, seek assistance from administration if questions about implementation of the policies or procedures arise, use appropriate language in all communications, ensure meaningful access to persons with limited English proficiency, adhere to a confidentiality policy, conduct intakes and meetings in a private space to ensure confidentiality, and never share client information outside of the agency without a release of information. And inform clients at intake of the equal access grievances process, and support clients through the grievances process and inform administration of any concerns. Okay, so let's really dive into the transgender and gender nonconforming policies and procedures. So that the goal here is that the COC and agencies within the COC will prohibit all forms of harassment and discrimination of or by clients, employees, visitors, and volunteers, including harassment and discrimination based on actual or perceived gender identity and expression, or based on an individual's association. Okay, so first let's talk about some terms. And I'll say that above all, it's really important to enforce the practice of addressing people by their preferred name and gender and their pronouns. And we'll reinforce that and get more into that. But that is the heart of what we're talking about here. Oftentimes when people talk about gender, what they're really talking about is what's referred to as someone's sex assigned at birth. So when a doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl, that is different than what is known as someone's gender identity, the really personal and internal, deeply held understanding of that person's gender, which may be either male or female, it may be neither of the two, and it may be either the same as or different than their sex assigned at birth. Gender expression is another something you might hear me say, that expression is then how someone is someone's appearance and behavior, how they choose to express gender to the world. We're getting in the weeds, but that may be different than their sex assigned at birth or even their gender identity. For safety reasons, someone may identify their gender identity may be one thing, and they might express as in a different way. Transgender is an umbrella term that that refers to, it can mean a lot of different things, but generally it refers to someone whose gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth. So either in a binary way where someone might have been assigned male at birth but identifies as female, or in more of a gender non-conforming way, or a non-binary space where they don't really identify as either. Those are kind of all held under the term, or the umbrella term, transgender. And so gender non-conforming then is someone who whose identity doesn't really fit within that binary space, and may not identify as either male or female, or both, or just there's all sorts of magical options in there. And that is kind of another umbrella term for, we refer to as gender non-conforming. So TGNC that you see on the screen is kind of the biggest umbrella we can find there. So it's also important to know that an additional and separate aspect of who someone is their sexual orientation. So who someone is attracted to is a different thing than who they see themselves as. So, for example, someone can have a male sex assigned at birth. They can have the gender identity of female, and that person can be either gay, heterosexual, bisexual, any type of sexuality. Those two, it's really important to keep in thinking about the fact that those two are two different aspects of who someone is. So to create an affirming environment for transgender or gender nonconforming people, it's really important to ask your clients about their name and their pronouns, because it might be different than what you might guess or assume. And be sure that then you and your staff and your volunteers use the preferred names and pronouns of the people that you're serving. So this is kind of on your screen here is a bit of a list of how some of this looks in the policy. Again, that you do not make decisions based on appearances, that you are using preferred gender and pronoun. This third one has a star here because that represents a minor change in the policy from 2021, from 2020. So this says, do not ask or seek information about a person's anatomy, and only seek the most necessary elements of information regarding a person's medical history for providing services. This was changed just to clarify that there's never an instance where you should need to ask about a person's anatomy. We changed the language to decouple that from any situation where you might need to ask about someone's medical history. But we want to be really clear that there is never an instance that you should need to ask any questions about a person's anatomy in order to be able to provide services for them. And that you don't require things like requiring their gender identity to match a gender on an ID or other documents. It's hard to change those. And that you absolutely make sure that you are giving people, if they have prescribed hormones or other medications as part of their gender affirming health care, that you give them full access to those medications. What does this mean for confidentiality? So the other side of this is that a transgender or gender nonconforming client may not express their gender identity openly in all contexts, including at your agency. It can be outright dangerous to do so. So revealing their gender identity or expression to others might compromise their development, put their safety at risk. And so talking about someone's gender identity without their permission could also make them feel blindsided, like they're being forced to reveal a deeply personal part of their identity without their consent. So people have the right to decide when and who finds out about their status. And so it's not always possible to prevent other people from knowing about someone's transgender or gender nonconforming status. Agencies and their representatives must make every effort to keep that information private unless the person has given permission to share. And even then, it should be shared on a need-to-know basis for very specific reasons. And even if someone discloses their status to you, it does not authorize your agency to represent or disclose it to others. So again, the real heart of this is that you are honoring the way that someone is presenting themselves to you. So if that person is revealing to you that they're trans, but they are not ready to be out yet, or to be in your, let's say, your women's dorm if they're a trans woman, then you need to respect their transgender identity and keep things that support their safety very, very confidential. Again, we are asking people what names and what pronouns they use, and then you are letting them lead how you can best support them. What does this mean then for physical accommodation? We know that your buildings and funding can constrain how you provide services. So this policy does state that wherever possible, it's really important to have spaces that have privacy, either in bathrooms or showers or bedrooms. This benefits a broad range of people. And as we've seen in a COVID-19 pandemic, congregate settings have other challenges as well. But it is particularly important and beneficial to be able to offer private spaces for people that identify as transgender or gender nonconforming. And so we do ask that you honor the request of an individual for accommodation based on personal safety or privacy concerns. There's a star here. We've added just a little bit of example language here around maybe a private sleeping area or access to a single-use bathroom. Try to make sure your physical setups have stalls and congregate showers or bathrooms or gender-neutral bathrooms to help ensure some privacy there. And if you are looking to build something in the future, that we really would encourage you to look for some privacy in sleeping areas, and as well as bathrooms and showers there. And eligibility, we really want to stress to not consider a client or potential client ineligible because of their appearance or their behavior does not conform to gender stereotypes. We're taking people at their word regarding their gender identity and their name and pronouns. And that you ensure all agency documents accommodate for legal and preferred name, as well as to incorporate all gender identities where appropriate. So what happens then around harassment or concerns? Gender variance is a normal part of human expression. And so while many people might fit easily or naturally into our culture's binary gendered options, many people don't. Some people barely step out of their gender-related expectations, while others take really big, giant leaps. So regardless of the degree, any individual who stray outside those typical boundaries are frequently become targets for misinformation, exclusion, and sometimes violence. And in many environments, even the slightest inconsistency from one's presentation from that which is considered normal for the person's assigned, sex assigned at birth or gender that people assume, can really lead to severe harassment. So it's really, really important to leverage trauma-informed care strategies and create a safe and responsible environment for people who are trans or gender nonconforming. So we ask that you take immediate action to resolve inappropriate behaviors, treatment, and harassment. And if someone needs to be moved for harassment to safety concerns, have a preference to move the client with a bias. You don't need to isolate someone who is experiencing harassment, you should work to dismiss, remove, take care of the safety by addressing the person who is causing harassment. Build subject matter as far as training and expertise. It's important to build subject matter expertise to increase cultural competency around transgender and gender nonconforming identities. This is just like, how are you training your staff on what this is, what this means? It's important that you be correcting misinformation or inaccurate conclusions around trans or gender nonconforming clients. Because that does threaten the health and safety of others, and that you ensure staff understand the potential impact that disclosure of confidential information can have on a client's progress to self-sufficiency. And we want to address the but what about HMIS? We understand that a lot of people kind of get worried about, well, what happens with the data that we need to put into HMIS here. And so remember that the principles here is that data is self-reported by clients, that you are trying to get the accurate information, that you get the information that you need to know to provide services, and that data or HMIS information should not be used to deny services. These principles apply to all clients within the requirements set by HUD and other funders. And so again, part of the policy reads that you are to ensure all staff, volunteers, and contractors maintain the confidentiality of a client's legal name and sex assigned at birth, and understand the potential impact that disclosure can have on a client's progress to self-sufficiency. So for HMIS, this means that HMIS should use the client's self-identified chosen name. It is their real name. This is different than necessarily a nickname. When someone is telling you that that is their real name, that's what you can put in HMIS. It doesn't matter if that's their legal name. And that you should always put a client's self-identified gender identity into HMIS, whether or not they have had any illegal gender marker on their ID or whatever changed. Again, it's very hard to do that. Remember, again, this is following kind of the guidelines of meeting people where they're at and listening to how they are telling you they would like to be presented. Okay, so here's your checklist for the equal access policy. Do you have an equal access policy? Is there a clear statement about non-discrimination because of race, ethnicity, color, national origin, language, ancestry, religion, sex, familial status, age, gender identity, LGBTQ+ status, marital status, domestic or sexual violence, victim status, or sensory, mental, or physical disability? Does your policy refer to the Department of Housing and Urban Development's equal access rule, anti-discrimination and privacy laws, and all other federal, state, and local non-discrimination laws and privacy law? And does that policy include specific procedures for working with trans or transgender and gender non-conforming persons? All right. Okay, moving on. Section 2, we have the family separation policy. So this rule pertains to both shelters and permanent housing projects. However, we really most often see this problem with shelters. Family shelters often have rules in place that prohibit families with male children that have reached adolescence to stay at the shelter, or require that the male child be placed somewhere else for the rest of the family to stay. This rule prohibits shelters from, this rule in the anti-discrimination policy prohibits shelters from denying entry to families with older male children, making families choose to stay or not based on having an older male child. This rule also protects against family shelters denying entry to single men with children or unmarried couples with children. So again, Here we are, this reads that they will not be separated, families will not be separated because of marital status, of age, or gender of the children, and that no COC or ESG funded project can deny admission of a household to a family shelter on the basis of age or gender of a child under the age of 18, or the gender or marital status of a parent or parents. And again, that is to shelters and housing providers. I'm not doing a great job of seeing the chat, but yes, I did see that question. Thank you. That yes, if you serve only singles, of course, that is an eligibility requirement. You can deny services to families, but if you serve families, this policy applies. So we want to say that this is one of the more common complaints that COC staff receive about family shelters. And so while we encourage all balance of state COC shelters to follow this rule and give families the best chance of solving their homelessness, all COC and ESG funded projects must follow this policy, and any complaint received by a family denied services or other complaint will be investigated and taken to the steering committee about remedial action, including notification of the state ESG office and potential relinquishment of funding. So we take these reports really seriously, and families and providers can report abuse of this rule to our email address at bos@ncceh.org for the COC to then take action. This is all about keeping families together. Families are more likely to succeed in getting and staying housed when they stay together, when the family unit is intact, and we are committed to preserving that. And so here's your checklist for the family separation policy. Do you have a family separation policy? Are the procedures in your policy spelled out that demonstrate how the client's agency staff, volunteers, and contractors will carry out the agency's anti-discrimination policies? That's your takeaway for that section. Okay, then moving into section 3, the faith-based inclusion policy. So the COC encourages all programs, faith-based or otherwise, to follow these rules because we know that meeting people where they are is an important step in building a trusting relationship that can lead to them seeking the services necessary to become physically and mentally healthier and sustainably housed in a permanent home. For many people experiencing homelessness, going to a religious organization can be a daunting exercise for fear that they will be forced to believe a certain way or judged for their past. This policy helps to minimize those risks for clients by offering services where people will be treated fairly, not needing to adhere to a particular religious practice or belief in order to receive the services that they need. So no COC or ESG or other federally funded project can use religion as a basis for entry into a program, explicitly or implicitly, nor can they require participants to attend or participate in a religious service to receive or continue receiving services. So the way this then reads is that programs will not discriminate based on religious belief or failure to participate in religious practices, and that faith-based organizations play an important role in providing services in the balance of state COC. We recognize that. But no program should discriminate based on religion or religious belief or mandate participation in a religious practice. So this one is short, it's simple, and it's straightforward. And here is your checklist for faith-based practice. So do your agencies have a faith-based activities policy in your anti-discrimination policy? And are procedures spelled out that demonstrate how the clients, agencies, staff, volunteers, and contractors will carry out that anti-discrimination policy? Okay, then section 4, grievances and anti-retaliation policies and procedures. Okay, so anyone participating in the COC has the right to file a grievance if they have a complaint about the provision of housing or services. We want to start right there. And retaliation includes, but is not limited to, harassment, intimidation, violence, program dismissal, refusing to provide services, use of profane or derogatory language to or in reference to the complainant, or a breach of contract. So the balance of state COC affirms that people who wish to file a grievance have the right to do so without retaliation from the party accused or any representative associated. So if the grievance is against a program administrator, the agency should have an object kind of representative body, such as like a board executive committee, to hear or make decisions about the grievance. So in the context where that is against like a program administrator, you really should have a neutral party there. But these procedures are really focused on the fact that anyone can submit a complaint form. If you would want that initially to go to a program administrator, and then program administration will address the grievance with the provider and the client or staff, volunteer, or contractor, whoever is involved. And then if a participant is not satisfied with the outcome, or if a participant fears retaliation at the program level, a complaint can be filed with NCCEH staff at balanceofstate@ncceh.org. So, just to be really clear, we are not encouraging your clients to go around you to come to us first. We absolutely affirm your ability as a program to administer your grievances procedures. We ask that you have one. And however, if that participant is not satisfied, they can reach out to NCCEH staff. And your checklist for that. So do you have a grievances or anti-retaliation policies and procedures as part of your agency's policies and procedures? And if so, do you share those with each person who is presenting for services? Good takeaway prompts and questions there. Okay, so here are some resources. That kind of concludes our breakdown throughout the policy. I will finish kind of doing these resources and checklists, and we will kind of end the recording and then dive into your questions. You can certainly get a notice of rights at the HUD Exchange info right there to talk about the equal access rights. They have also published the equal access final rule. And there is a link to that there. And just recently, last week, HUD has reaffirmed the equal access rule as it stands after HUD under the Trump administration proposed changes to that, limiting transgender people's access to shelter and housing services. So in the current administration's reiteration of the equal access rule, they have issued new technical assistance resources, which are quite extensive. And the link, I've created short links to those. I hope they work, and they are there. So we would encourage you to check those out. Those are hot off the press. And quite extensive if you have questions around transgender identity in shelters, transgender access to services, and how to create really supportive and inclusive housing and shelter services. And again, your checklist, we will make these slides available. please refer back to those and to help you develop your own policies and procedures that either mirror or do not conflict with the North Carolina Balance of States anti-discrimination policy. Okay, so then for next steps, we recommend that your agency follow this same rule. Honestly, COC and ESG programs will be monitored on this policy, and we do not want your agency to have a monitoring and suddenly get a finding because of your policies and procedures are not up to date. So for COC grantees in particular, it's likely that the COC will be looking at your policies and procedures in this year's competition and scoring your program on adherence to this and other policies. With that being said, please update your policies and procedures as soon as possible. And as always, please reach out to NCCEH staff with any questions that you might have, and our contact info is there. So